So this week we are going to look at Psalm 19. I picked a little rougher of a translation this time because I think this translation I felt like got at kind of the poetry of it, and I think this psalm more than some are trying to say something very specific, very theological. I feel like this is one that's more one of those kind of gut psalms that might be not quite as precise. It's kind of an exuberant talking, feeling expression of what they want to say. So I kind of went with this one, a little more poetry, but it is also a little rougher, a little weaker on the grammar. But that's not going to bother me because I can always sort of read anything right here. So Psalm 19 tells us, "The heavens tell God's glory, and his handiwork sky declares. Day by day breathes utterance, and night by night pronounces knowledge. There is no utterance, there are no words, their voice is never heard. Though all the earth their voice goes out. To the world's edge their words. For the sun he set up a tent in them, and like a groom from his canopy comes, exults like a warrior running his course. From the ends of the heavens his going out, and his circuit to their ends, and nothing can hide from his heat. The Lord's teaching is perfect, restoring to life. The Lord's pact is steadfast, it makes the fool wise. The Lord's precepts are upright, delighting the heart. The Lord's command unblemished, giving light to the eyes. The Lord's fear is pure, outlasting all time. The Lord's judgments are truth, all of them just. More desired than gold, than abundant fine gold, and sweeter than honey, quintessence of bees. Your servant too takes care of them, in keeping them great reward. Unwitting sins who can grasp? Of unknown actions clear me. From willful men preserve your servant, let them not rule over me. Then I shall be blameless and clear of great crime. Let my mouth's utterances be pleasing, and my heart's stirring before you, Lord, my rock and redeemer." So what I was struck by with this is they're kind of, you can see the two sections, I split them up there. A lot of people think that this was originally probably two poems that were stitched together. It's a little hard to tell, but you can see there's kind of two pretty different sections, right? But what I was struck by is these two sections both come from a very similar attitude of our heart, a certain way of looking at the world, right? So in this case, they're looking at nature, at the skies, right? How many times have we sat before a starry sky or really considered what the sun is, even though we're so used to it? This fiery star that provides basically all the heat that life can come from, energy. And you can look at it from kind of that perspective and know scientifically you can be annoyed that it's beating down on you. But I think the way that they're looking at the skies and the stars in this psalm is something that we can learn from. I think they are looking with a sense of purpose, kind of asking like, what is the meaning of these things? Why does it feel this sense of awe, right? Think about it whether we're up in the mountains or we see something unusually beautiful. In this case, it's again staring, probably looking at the starry sky at the first part, and then thinking about just the power that's represented in the sun. And I think that awe is something that many people come to Colorado for. Many people connect with something, right? Something bigger, the sense of awe, the sense of humility because of just the vastness of the natural world. The skies are a huge one for people who stargaze, and that is a spiritual experience for them, right? As I think it should be. And I think the psalm kind of starts in that attitude of the heart, right? It doesn't start trying to give us very specific theological things about God and what we know about him. It just starts with this kind of sense of looking at the skies and feeling like this has got to tell me something about God, right? There's something there. I'm not sure I can quite say it or articulate it. But I think we maybe at times rush to answers a little too quickly. We don't experience this. We don't just drink in the kind of the awe, the mystery, I don't really know what to say about it. And I think this psalm does a neat job of kind of playing with that idea, like, okay, what can this sense of awe, what can the world around us actually tell us about God? There might be some kind of a hint of what it's trying to tell us. And a lot of the language itself is not, looking at some of, in this first section again, there's several words in here that are stolen from like crafting language, from woodworking and metal crafting and all that. So there's kind of a hint that maybe that's something that's amazing, that's uttering about the sky. Maybe it's hinting that God made these things. And the fact that God made them, that maybe tells us something about God as well, right? Something else that's kind of neat in here, especially this section on the sun, which we're not going to pick up on, but back in the day, and we have a lot of examples of this, a very common thing for cultures that worshipped the sun. We've got the Egyptian sun god and Ra and some of the others. There's a Canaanite version. And one of the most common ones that they would write are these hymns to the sun gods. We have a bunch of examples of this. And so this writer actually picks up on that language and uses the sun god language. They could have even used it as a model, saying, as the sun is pretty amazing, right? There's some heat there. It's powerful. You can see why people would be tempted to maybe worship the sun, and yet in this psalm saying, let's move beyond that. Let's not get stuck on the object, even though it is powerful and amazing in its heat and its life provision, right? God's the guy who sets up the tent for it. God provides for the sun, which in your mind was the most powerful thing out there, an object worthy of worship. And so I think there's something kind of neat in that they're both looking at the natural world with a sense of awe, sense of, wow, this really is amazing and powerful and beautiful, but they're not getting stuck on it either, which we can do at times. They're recognizing that people in our culture see those things, and they put their hearts behind them. They want to go up into the mountains. They want to stare at the sky. They want to find this sense of bigness there, and we'll even put it in terms that they get, but we don't want to stay there either, right? The vagueness of that sense of awe, I think, can also become a problem in the long term. And that's one of the reasons I think the second poem or the second section is included. We go from this amazing, huge sense of God's wonder and power in the things that he has made, to kind of the opposite side, to the fact that God has, in fact, revealed himself to us in some kind of specific ways, right? Probably the connection for a lot of the ancient world was a lot of those sun gods were also considered wisdom gods. So again, playing with the way people are already thinking in ways that are going to be natural for them. So we're going to shift from looking at the sun to thinking about wisdom. And so we get this, this section. The Lord's teaching is perfect and restoring to life. The Lord's pact is steadfast. It makes the fool wise. The Lord's precepts are upright, delighting the heart. So each of these kind of sections, and the way I didn't create the break there, the translator did that, and I think it was really smart because it shows you the parallels of what's going on here. And these words themselves, teaching, pact, precepts, commands, judgments, they're all technical words, but they're all kind of similar words too. And the idea there is, like the Bible's included that, Torah in the Old Testament, but it's also including the teaching, like when we read a commentary or what we're doing right now, hearing some random person give you their thoughts on it, when we go back and forth thinking about it. God can speak in lots of different ways. God can tell us those things specifically. It's reminding us not to get stuck on one way of hearing from God, of are we really listening, right? The benefits of God's kind of way of talking show up in here a lot too, because so the second one's in there. Like, okay, so the Lord's teaching is perfect. So what? Well, it also restores life. It's almost a restoration piece that makes the fool wise. That's a fun one. I learned this word. The word fool, it means empty one. It means her head is empty. I think it's a good phrase for especially this wisdom stuff, right? Good question for us. What exactly are we using to fill our own heads and our own emptiness? Is it things that are going to fit like this, or the type of things God is about? Or are we just filling it and reinforcing that emptiness? Fun idea. Delighting the heart. please, please, please don't make the mistake of thinking God wants us to grit our teeth, right? And be religious because we're supposed to, and it's the right thing to do. It gives light to the eyes. Lets us see the way things actually are, right? We need it right now. Things are confusing. It's hard to know what to do, and yet that's God's commands are giving us. There's a sense of restoration, of fullness, of healing in each one of these things, coming from a source that we don't tend to like, right? Teaching, or sometimes law, rules sometimes. I think more healthily, practices and rhythms, how we get better at anything, right? God has a certain rhythms he's inviting us into, certain ways of doing things, certain statements on what is right and wrong and what our priorities should be. Why? Because he wants to restore to life. He wants to make us fools wise and fill us and bring light to our eyes. And we get the section kind of after those, where sure enough, it reminds us again that there's actually, in of themselves, there is something there. He compares it to honey, which was, one of the sweetest, best tasting things they had their hands on at the time they wrote this, right? It's not just gritting your teeth. There actually is a delight in spending time in God's presence and looking at things from the same way God does. And then there's this kind of section underneath, which I was a little baffled by, because it feels very discordant, right? Everything's been so positive. Look at nature in the sense of awe. Look at what God is inviting us into, being wise and filled and things working right. And yet that's not what I find in my own heart a lot of the time. It's not what I find in the world. There is a dissonance there. And I think there's this great question of okay, why? If this is really true, if we really believe this, why does my heart look so differently? Why do I find myself being filled with so many things besides that which gives life and brings me to God's presence and follows life this way? And I think even there, our poet is being smart enough to say, even there, I need some help, God. I'm not going to do this by will alone, right? I need you to rescue me from physical problems out there, from the way the world is, and from my own heart. The dissonance is often created by me and in the world. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that it can be easy to sit on that mountaintop and say everything seems really good, but that's not who I always am. That's not the way the world so much of the time is. And so I think you see in the first section the question of how are we looking at the world? Do we see the wonder that is around us, or have we got so used to the sun being over our heads, the skies that are out there, we don't even bother to see what can teach us about God and invite us into a sense of awe, a sense of humility as well. I'm not as big and important as I like to tell myself. Are we listening to God in the way in the section, right? Are we being filled with Him the way we could be, but we often aren't. We have that dissonance. So what is it we spend our time looking at and delighting in? What is it we spend our time filling ourselves with and listening to? Is it God's voice? Is it a voice that just wants us to buy something? Or to uplift somebody else so they can say how smart they are and wonderful they are? And I think that last phrase, one which gets pulled out of context so much and people use, right? Let my mouth's utterances be pleasing, my heart's stirring before you, Lord, my rock and my redeemer. I think that's a really beautiful prayer of opening our hearts, the things, the stirrings, the ponderings of our hearts. What do they ruminate on? What are they chewing on most of the time? And God, I hope the things I say, the way I interact with other people, the things I do, the things that are below the surface, fit with a heart that I think you're offering here. One that comes from, ultimately, God is my rock, my solid place in the midst of a very stormy, confusing world. And you're my Redeemer. You're the one who's going to save me from doing a lot of things besides this with my heart and mind, right? And so I think if God is working on our mouths and on our hearts as utterances, I think we are going to find ourselves experiencing the first part of this poem. we are going to see the world differently and see something that shows up every morning like a sunrise or just the sun coming up. That's the true wonder it is. It will be whispering something about God to us. I think as we continue to fill ourselves, be fed by the things that God values, we're going to listen to his voice very differently than the voices around us in the world that tells us when and where we're valuable, or who is valuable, or what we should be doing with our time and our energy, right? I think the invitation is usually to see and experience the world very differently than we do. God is so much closer than we give him credit for most of the time. So the question, I think, as we're praying this and saying, yeah, Lord, I do want my mouth's utterances to be pleasing. I want my heart's stirrings to be before you, because you are my rock, my redeemer, nothing else is. It's going to change what we see. It's going to change what we fill ourselves with. It's going to change what we listen to. I think that invitation is there for us yet again. Will we live into that distance, or will we live into a different way of seeing and being the world that God is inviting us into?